And just before we get really started, I want to give a heartfelt thank you to everybody that has contributed to making this event happen. Our wonderful panelists and moderator, as well as all the volunteers, some of whom are here, some of whom have done work behind the scenes ahead of time. We could not have done it without every single person pitching in. So thank you very much. All right, next slide, please. Can we go one back?
Of course.
Thanks. All right, so Seattle is on the ancestral lands of the Duwamish, Suquamish, Tulalip, Muckleshoot, Puyallup, Stillaguamish, Snohomish, and other Coast Salish peoples. It is important we acknowledge whose ancestral lands we live, work, play, and organize on, and to understand they were here since time immemorial and are still here today. That they have been the stewards of these lands since time immemorial, that abuses of a colonial government and tyrannical forces supplanted and subjugated their and our peoples, and that those harms persist to this day. It is also important that as beneficiaries of these atrocities, we are actively working to remediate those harms, and we are working towards a more just future for all our peoples, and especially those who have suffered intergenerational trauma. If you can see at the bottom, Real Rent Duwamish, I encourage you, if you're moved, to give a donation to them tonight or tomorrow. Next slide. All right. So we are Seattle Solidarity Budget. We are a cross-movement coalition fighting for a city budget that centers the needs of the most marginalized and vulnerable Seattle residents, responds with funding that is commiserate with the crises we are facing, and prioritize collective care and liberation. At the core of our ethos is our refusal to allow our movements and organizations to be pitted against each other for funding. Divesting from cops, courts, cages, and prosecutors, and investing in Black communities goes hand in hand with climate justice work, housing justice work, and participatory budgeting, among other things. So that's what we stand for. All right, so right now, at least 32% of Seattle's general fund, which is the part that is not already allocated of the budget, is being spent on criminalization and punishment. That's at least 32%. It's hard to kind of break out the numbers super specifically, but so 32 is the floor. The effect of this carceral focus is essentially to defund or underfund all the other services in the city. And it also causes large amounts of suffering in the form of sweeps of our unhoused neighbors, repeated arrests, court dates, and nights in the deadly King County Jail. I don't know if you saw the news last week or the week before. There keep being stories coming out of the horrible things that are happening in the King County Jail, which is very understaffed and underfunded. We believe true safety comes from guaranteeing that people's material needs are met. Every person in Seattle should have what they need to survive and thrive. We reject a system that sorts people into categories of deserving versus undeserving to assign resources. The city right now has prioritized punishment as a means to attempt to mitigate social issues when services and access to resources are what have been proven not only to mitigate, but to actually address root causes of these issues. And right now, instead, what happens is it leads to more and more contact with the police and the punishment system. So this year for the budget, we have developed 9 guarantees for services that would provide a base standard of living and quality of life for all people in Seattle. And they are housing, transportation, communication, income, climate action and resilience, food, living wage, care, and health. If you're interested in any of those, there's one-pagers on all of them on our website, seattlesolidarityBudget.com. But tonight, we are here to talk about one in particular. So this is a quote by Ursula K. Le Guin, who is a very famous science fiction writer. "We live in capitalism. Its power seems inescapable, but then so did the divine rights of kings." I just wanted to take a moment to talk about how part of Solidarity Budget is presenting a vision to our community about how things could be different and how things could be better and what a more equitable city would look like. I feel like right now there's a lot of despair and hopelessness and feeling like things can't possibly change. And often people in power are incentivized for people to feel that way, to feel like there's nothing that they can do because that maintains what already is happening. But part of what we believe is that while change might be difficult to achieve, it does not mean that anything going on in the world today is inevitable. So it's important to open up our minds and our imaginations and think big, dream big, think about what could be possible and how things could look different. So what is GBI, Guaranteed Basic Income? So this is our income guarantee. So GBI programs have been proliferating across the United States, especially since the pandemic started in 2020. A lot of them have been funded by COVID emergency dollars and some private partnerships as well. And these pilots have provided a proof of concept. And they show that providing unconditional periodic cash payments with no strings attached addresses increasing economic disparity and allows people to begin building financial security and generational wealth. We also know these programs aren't associated with decreased employment at all. So as upstream solutions to poverty and instability, these programs are cost effective when compared to the bloated and very, very expensive criminal legal system. Just to clear up a confusion that I often see about GBI versus UBI, so guaranteed basic income versus universal basic income, because these ideas are similar and they go together, but guaranteed basic income is usually talking about redistributing wealth to those who need it most and have been historically impacted by having less opportunities. Whereas universal basic income, UBI, is that everybody gets a set regular cash payment regardless of income or need. So just to, because I know there's some confusion around that, what we're talking about tonight is GBI, the first one, guaranteed basic income. All right, and the benefits of GBI are myriad. I've spent the last many, many months reading many studies, case studies, results of all these pilots that have been across the country, and there are so many benefits. Here are a bunch: improved overall health, including improved mental health. It turns out if you're less stressed out about where your next meal is coming from, or how you're gonna close that gap in paying your rent, or how you're gonna deal with an unexpected car payment repair issue, that you are less likely to have mental health problems. Decreased addiction, increased food security, fewer unplanned pregnancies, and a reduction in low birth weights, greater income security, improved housing security, increased employment, and also adult educational opportunities. This one, increase of babies' brain function is one of the results we've seen, as well as better educational outcomes for kids. There have been a few really interesting studies in the last couple of years showing a decrease in risk of interpersonal firearm violence because of GBI programs. And it addresses inequality, of course, pretty directly, which predicts homicide rates better than any other variable. So there's just a huge host of benefits of GBI programs in general. Here are a couple examples. The 2021 National Child Tax Credit expansion caused the lowest rate of child poverty on record in the United States at 5.2%, bringing 3.7 million children out of poverty by the end of the year. Didn't change how much the parents were working. If anything, maybe they were working a little bit more. This was actually the program that inspired our former Councilmember Gonzalez to become interested in GBI as a program. And the other one just came across my feed last week, I think, the Denver Basic Income Project. So it provided $1,000 a month to about 800 people experiencing homelessness this year. And they just collated the first 6 months of their data. And the results are that no one is still sleeping outside. Let's just pause a minute. I mean, I'm blown away by that. I was blown away by the results of that. No one is still sleeping outside of those people getting $1,000 a month. Full-time employment up, fewer visits to the ER, and fewer nights spent in jail. So, I mean, just amazing results for something that's really fairly simple. So what we at Solidarity Budget are asking for in our income guarantee is to have an unconditional monthly payment for a GBI program that will prioritize people who meet the following conditions. So basically, who live in over-policed communities or criminalized communities. So have experienced sweeps, police contact, court contact, incarceration, family policing like foster care, gender-based violence, Black communities, Native communities, communities of color, people experiencing homelessness, people with disabilities, queer and trans people, and people experiencing impoverishment. So those are the people that we would like to prioritize in a program in Seattle. So this is a map of kind of the timeline for the way a GBI program would work in an ideal world, which is that we'd win a GBI program. Then we work with local nonprofits to distribute the funds to the most impacted community members, and then keep expanding and growing. I will say though, while this is our dream scenario, I don't want to give you false expectations. This is a long shot. This is a big fight. This might take more than a year to get off the ground. But it's important to us that we fight fights that align with our values and what we think people need. And our values are very aligned with GBI programs, and we really think that this would positively impact the lives of a lot of people here in Seattle. So that's why we're bringing it to the forefront in our fight in this year's budget. Just to give you an idea of the costs, a person can spend 1 month at King County Jail, or they can receive GBI payments for a year. I agree. It's kind of amazing. So 2 lateral hires, so that means they have experience already. SPD officers can get hiring bonuses, or 3 people can get GBI for a year. The salary of 1 Seattle prosecutor, average, 7 people can receive GBI payments for 1 year. And then this year, there are $8.1 million of SPD salary savings that are positions that SPD hasn't filled. Roughly 450 people could receive GBI for a year with that salary savings money if we could claw it back from Seattle Police Department. So we love your support for starting a GBI program in Seattle. We have opportunities for you to get involved. The first one is tomorrow morning, which I know is very soon, at 10 a.m. But if you happen to be really moved and available, you can go to City Hall or you can call in remotely. There are talking points available at that address, bit.ly, change Seattle budget. But the big chance for comment is next week, Wednesday, October 18th at 5 p.m. It's the big budget public hearing for October. And it's also, you can call in, or it's at City Hall, starts at 5 p.m. We're also going to be having a public comment workshop virtually on Monday, the 16th at 6 p.m. that you can sign up for on our website if you want help kind of learning more about the issues, preparing your public comment, getting tips for how to give a good public comment. You can do that at our workshop on Monday. You can also email your council members or call their offices. Like, it's all good. The public comment maybe is the best, but it doesn't mean you shouldn't get involved in other ways if that's what works best for you. And you can also volunteer with us. We're always looking for volunteers. We have a QR code out there that you can scan on your phone, or again, you can go to our website, seattlesolidarityBudget.com, and get in touch with us and volunteer for us. So without further ado, I want to bring up our wonderful panelists who are just incredibly experienced and involved with different local efforts of GBI here in our area. So I'm going to ask them to come up, and I'm going to turn things over to our moderator, who is Chrissy Shimizu, who's the executive director of Puget Soundstage.
Hi, everyone. One second. Can we give a round of applause to Amy again for the great presentation, and to everyone who organized us tonight, set up the room, brought the food. Thank you. Oh, yes. And hello, everyone online. What is that? Not really sure. There should be a little.
How do you turn it on?
This needs to come this way. That way they can hear you.
Okay.
And this one will also turn up. Okay. Go ahead. Okay. All right. So thank you, Amy, for going over the slide deck about GBI and explaining that to us. I'm really excited to have here a panel tonight that are community experts on the matter, and so we're going to be able to talk more in depth about what GBI is and how it will transform the community. So first, I also am going to be playing the role as timekeeper, unfortunately, which is so uncomfortable. So I'll let you all know how much time we have for each of the questions. And the first question is to just start us off. Everyone introduce yourself, why you were personally attracted to the idea of GBI, and details about either the local GBI program you're involved with or a GBI program you're interested in replicating here in Seattle. And we'll start with you, Councilmember Zahilay.
Thank you. Testing. Is this thing working? Can people hear me? Oh, you have to turn stuff on before you can see. Oh, okay, thank you. Good evening, everybody. I'm Girmay Zahilay, King County Councilmember, and I went to college with a guy named Michael Tubbs, and he ended up becoming the mayor of Stockton, California at the age of 25. And he launched the first guaranteed basic income program in a city in the United States. And that's what first got me interested. Like, whoa, my homie just started a GBI program, and it ended up doing all the things that we saw in the results in the PowerPoint, which is everybody was saying this is going to make people quit their jobs. It's just a giveaway. And then he did this program giving people $1,000 a month. And the outcomes were employment increased. People got more employed. People's stress dramatically dropped. People were able to be financially stabilized in their lives for the first time ever. And so when I saw all of those results, I said, we need to have more stuff like that here. And I think I'm going to be able to talk about that later down the line of the program that I started here, or should I talk about it now?
Why don't you give us a little bit of the detail on that now?
Yeah, so at the beginning of my first term, which was 2020, I've been on the King County Council now for 3 years. If you had asked me at that point, what were my priorities, I would have said, big abstract things. I want to address climate change. I want to address the housing crisis. Our democracy is in peril, all this abstract stuff. And then suddenly 2 months into my term, the world turns upside down and we have a global pandemic. And suddenly my job went from, I'm trying to solve all these high level things to, we just got to get resources out the door because people are about to lose their homes. They're getting evicted. People's small businesses were crumbling that they were building for generations. People were living on the street. It was a crazy time. People just needed food. And so I just wanted to find a way to get resources out of the door. And, when you're part of a council, you usually have to get the majority vote, and there's a big legislative process. And so instead of doing that, I just said, where can I find resources? And I identified that we have this office fund that we usually use to pay our staff and to buy furniture. And so let's just get rid of all of that and just put it out to community. So we started a guaranteed basic income pilot program worth just $100,000 and partnered with 2 organizations, one in South Seattle, one in Skyway, to support 10 families with a guaranteed basic income pilot program. And I'm looking forward to telling you more about those results, but hint, hint, same positive results.
Pielino Toka Patanjali della Rocha, Chica Klingan, and hello everyone, my name is Patanjali della Rocha. I'm the program director at Hummingbird Indigenous Family Services for our guaranteed income program. I'm a Mexica and Tlingit descent, which are tribes from Mexico and the Philippines, and I'm also Ashkenazi Jewish. It's really good to be here with you all today. Thank you so much for the invitation to come speak with you all. And I think my background is as a doula and perinatal health educator. I also have degrees in social work and public health, and as like a community-based organizer working primarily with Indigenous, immigrant, and incarcerated communities. I really saw how big the disparities were in access to care and resources, and then when there was care, it was often really biased and violent. And when I first heard about guaranteed income, it was actually with a pilot program in the Bay Area that was giving Black mothers $1,000 a month, and I just thought like, oh man, that's so cool. And I just loved the idea of it. And about 6 months after I graduated from my master's program, I dreamt about one of my mentors like 3 nights in a row. And I texted her, I was like, okay, I'm taking him from the universe. What's up, Cammie? And she was like, I just applied for a grant to do a guaranteed basic income program for Indigenous pregnant people. And if I get it, I want you to work on it. And that was kind of how I ended up in the program. And so we just launched in August after 2 years of doing a community-based design process with an elder council and community members and input from the National Guaranteed Income Movement. And we're giving 150 families or pregnant folks $1,250 a month from pregnancy until their child's 3rd birthday.
That's amazing.
It's good to be with you. I'm Jaelynn Scott, she, her pronouns. I'm the executive director of Lavender Rights Project. And we particularly work with, through a Black trans feminist lens, really looking at all Black community and all trans community and intersections thereof to prevent violence against our community and come up with better outcomes for us. That's what drove us to Guaranteed Income. In summer of 2020, we started a mutual aid program like a lot of nonprofits did. And we were seeing some of the same people come back to us over and over again. And it wasn't resulting in any really beneficial outcomes in their lives. And we weren't seeing a prevention of, interaction with police or violence in their life. And so we decided to do something different, and we chose a very small, very humble program, but 5 folks who were the people that most interacted with our mutual aid work and try something different. And so we've been giving them, I believe, it's been over 2 years now, 2 years and a few months, of $1,000 a month for each of those people. All of them happen to be Black and trans. And we can talk a little bit later about, just the amazing outcomes that it has had in their lives. It hasn't fixed everything, but it's actually kept them out of harm's way, and they're seeing stable employment. I'm also on the board of the Transgender Cultural District in San Francisco, and they were the first in the country to do a guaranteed income for trans people, and working with other community organizations. 55 folks. That program, I think, has started up for a few months now in San Francisco. I believe it's $1,200 a month for 55 trans people in the city of San Francisco. So I'm happy to talk about that work too, as much as I know I joined the board after that work got started. Good to be with you.
Thank you.
Hello, everyone. I want to thank you for joining us today. It's just so great to see a big turnout for Guaranteed Basic Income, and an honor to be on a panel with you all as well. My name is Abigail Lawson. I serve as the director of the Growing Resilience in Tacoma demonstration, or what we call GRIT. GRIT got its roots from that same Stockton program that was mentioned earlier. The then mayor of Stockton, Michael Tubbs, called up Mayor Victoria Woodards in Tacoma, said, hey, we've really got something working here. Do you have any interest in joining a national coalition? And she said, sure, I don't have any, budgetary funds to give to a program right now. And he said, no, that's all right. I'll call you in a couple of months. And then came, that time passed, and he called in with quite a generous donation for us to uplift a guaranteed basic income program. At that point, Mayor Woodards then turned to United Way of Pierce County, asked them to be the lead kind of implementer, administrator for the work. So really the program sits between the city of Tacoma, Pierce County, United Way of Pierce County, and then the national coalition that's now formed from Michael Tubbs' great work, which is now known as Mayors and Counties for Guaranteed Income. And then we also partner with some sort of research institute dependent on the evolution of the work. In 2022, we gifted 110 different Tacoma families $500 a month, unrestricted, totally no strings attached, either into their pre-existing bank account or onto a prepaid debit card. And I'm really excited to announce also just a couple of weeks ago, we actually just signed a contract with the state following an investment from them, a very generous investment from the state, which will allow us to continue programming for the next couple of years. So there's just, very exciting. Thank you. We're excited for that. We're excited to be focused on direct programming in Tacoma. We do a lot of what we call narrative change, which I imagine we'll get into, and then just a ton of advocacy, as we totally believe that it should be ran in every city across the country. We also really work heavily with the federal government trying to push the needle there too, as like was mentioned, the child tax credit just showed really amazing results.
Thank you, everyone. So guaranteed basic income is a big shift for our society culturally, and I think that part of that is we're hearing a lot of opposition. So help us understand how that opposition is being framed by people who don't support guaranteed basic income, and what are some common objections that we might hear? Anyone who wants to go first?
I'm just gonna turn it off.
Okay.
I guess I wanna start answering this by just kind of taking a look at the landscape a little bit, particularly for our communities. Like in Washington State, we released a report, the Washington State Maternal Mortality Review released a report, and I sit on that committee as well. And in that, it found that Native women in Washington State are dying at 7 times the rate during pregnancy or in the first year after a baby is born than white women, and more than twice the rate than that of Black women. And it's hard to know if those disparities exist because more so in the state of Washington because we disaggregate our data better, or if it's just truly a higher rate in Washington State. And the bar is like on the floor for our communities when it comes to like health. And I really truly think of this as like a health intervention, and I'm coming at it from a reproductive justice lens. Right, the bar is like not dying for Black and Native communities. Like that's our standard of health, and I think that we can raise that standard a lot more. And so while I know those negative narratives are out there, so much of that places the blame on communities for their own lack of access to resources, because we know that there's so many pathways that go from racism to health disparities, but all of them fundamentally function through a restriction of access to resources and a devaluation of life. And doing something like a guaranteed income really helps to flip those narratives and change those things, particularly when you're bringing it together with a lot of this narrative change work and bringing in the stories and the humanity of people. So I know that didn't directly answer the question, but I think like with so much of this is that it's not about directly countering those stories for us, but it's about completely shifting the dialogue. Because what we know is that Indigenous mothers are incredible and powerful, and what we're doing with our narrative change work is we're documenting that and letting people tell their own stories on their own terms, and that's part of what guaranteed income allows people to do, is to like reclaim their narratives. And then we're inviting the larger population into the privilege of understanding like what it actually means to be an Indigenous parent. And so I almost don't want to like touch those like harmful narratives because like they don't deserve a response.
I think I'm in agreement, and I'll say it in a different way. I feel like sometimes in Washington it's really interesting, looking at the legislature and looking at politics here. We tend to we have a bit of privilege in terms of progressive values that we hold and control of the legislature and et cetera, right? So there is power there, but there's a lot of anxiety about those narratives and the centering of those narratives that keep us from making progress. I didn't track it, a lot I think other people on this panel have, but the state push for guaranteed income, one of the major pieces of conversation was about what was the other side saying? And I think as a Black trans person, as a Black trans organization, we don't have time to even engage that discussion because these are the same people that don't think we should exist, frankly, and I think that's very clear in this country right now. So we need people who actually believe in human life, period, believe that all people have a right to live and to live freely, to just stand up and be bold, and especially in places where we don't have to have that conversation, which I believe is this state, we could actually do something quite different right here and actually stand up as a beacon for the rest of the country in places where in Texas, you might actually have to engage those conversations because you need some of those people to change their mind. Well, let's just actually pave the way forward and not center those people in our conversations. It's pointless at this point because we can get some work done without engaging them.
I agree with everything that my colleagues on the stage have said. And just to build off what Jaelynn was saying, I think the opposition depends on what level of government you're talking about. If we were to pursue a guaranteed basic income program at the federal level, and for a lot of reasons, I think the federal government would be the best position to have a large scale program. I think the opposition would be you just have a whole lot of Republicans who are in charge of Congress right now, and for them it's going to be handout. Here comes the left trying to just give money to people to stay home and not work. That's the kind of rhetoric you would probably hear, and I think it would be a tall mountain to overcome to get any of them to support something like this. At the King County level, I think just imagine if Girmay puts out a ballot measure that says we're going to increase your property taxes to pay for mental health services and addiction services. That's probably more likely to pass because people like a homeowner who's going to be voting on this is probably thinking, oh, like that thing is benefiting the people who I want to be benefited, the people who I deem to be deserving of help. And if they get help, mental health services, addiction services, maybe they'll be off the street and maybe, things will be better in our society. Whereas if I tell people, I'm putting a ballot measure to increase your property taxes, to give money to people unrestricted, just a monthly payment, you can see how that's a tougher thing to market because there is, number one, feeling of we're just giving money to people. The more freedom you give to people with the money that they have, oh, they're going to go out there and they're going to use it for drugs and they're going to do X, Y, and Z. That's how people think. And it's not a clear sense of these are the types of people that I deem worthy of being helped, even though they are, right? And then lastly, there's just an education issue. People know what mental health services are. People know what addiction services are. But if you put something on the ballot that says guaranteed basic income, people are going to be like, what? What is that? So you have a perceived morality thing to overcome, a perceived work ethic thing to overcome, and you have a perceived just what is this thing that you're trying to do issue to overcome.
Adding on to everyone, there's so much that comes up for me, and I really want to talk about the fact that guaranteed income has so many different ways to really just disrupt the status quo in a multitude of ways, and two that are present for me in my mind right now is one, trust. Guaranteed income is really predicated off of the concept of trust, a real reciprocal level of trust too, is that it assumes that the government or the nonprofit, whoever's distributing the cash, trust each individual recipient to use the dollars to the best of their own ability according to their own needs. It also requires the recipient, the individual, the public to trust this institution, which has historically likely been very harmful to them. And so that I see come up a lot especially on the individual level when speaking with recipients, is that there's this massive hurdle to get over that and to actually believe that this cash is going to continue to come and it's actually trustworthy. It's not going to be owed back at some point. We're not going to pull the rug out from under them. So that's one thing. The other thing that I want to talk on, which maybe is kind of a larger scale one, is just the power dynamic. Is that the way that I see it in American culture, cash is power. And having cash allows you access to your basic needs. It allows you access to maybe take a day off and go and advocate at the legislature for something. It allows you to volunteer for things that you care about and really settle into what it is that you want for yourself, your home, your community, and to advocate for that. And on a large scale, I feel this kind of nuanced anxiety of like, okay, if we give people cash, that means that we're giving people power. And do the people in power really want to share some of that? I think that that's a question that's starting to come up, and there's just a lot of discomfort on all ends of that scenario, right? Like I said, for those that have to share power, we're seeing some discomfort. For those that are, that have historically been told you're not worthy, you're not enough, you're not working hard enough, to all of a sudden have an institution come in and say, you are deserving, you are worthy, here's an unconditional cash support, and all of these programs that we're going to design with care and empathy and compassion. I've seen with some of our recipients, like that can also be an uncomfortable resharing of power too. So that's something that comes up for me, is it just basic income really provides power and empowerment to each of the individuals. And that is really a shaker up within the United States that I hear tension around.
Thank you. Before moving on to the next question, I was instructed to punctuate at the end of this question that the organizing principle behind GBI is an unconditional monthly cash payment, and that our communities know best and our people know best how to take care of themselves and how to spend the money to take care of themselves. And so that is what's driving the organizing behind Seattle Solidarity Budget GBI. But now we get to talk about all the good things our programs in motion are doing. So each panelist has some time to share like where you all are seeing like really positive impacts in the programs you've implemented or in programs you'd like to model.
I'll go first just because I have to take off after this to another event. But so I have, in my first term on the council, on the King County Council, I've worked on programs and launched programs with price tags of billions of dollars, billions of dollars for crisis care centers, tens of millions of dollars for affordable homes, tens of millions for climate action. And the Guaranteed Basic Income Plan program that I worked on, as I mentioned before, it was very small, just $100,000 to $200,000, relatively small. I can tell you with confidence that there is not a single thing I've worked on since being on the council that has had a more profound individual level impact than the Guaranteed Basic Income pilot program. And I just want to read for you all a few of the testimonies that I heard from people that benefited from this program. So some of them will bring a tear to your eye, like just when you think about how it's benefited them. So here's one of the participants. Before we got those funds, the most things we were struggling with was just getting our needs like bathroom soap, laundry detergent, toothpaste, brushes. Like those were really hard for us to get. But now it's like we're able to restock every week, buy a whole bunch of them, and won't buy any for 1 month because we've got a bunch of them. That is the greatest blessing, to be honest. So you can see that it's not just the necessities, it's the dignity, being able to buy just the things that you need for your own hygiene. Like that's just powerful. Another one said, I just bought a new Christmas tree that I bought this year. GBI makes me happier because I'm allowed to do things that I would be stressing about prior to this. Christmas tree. There's another one said, the funds took that extra comfort, something that's been struggling on your chest. The funds were able to just lift that up. The funds helped us a lot. It was a huge blessing. I would just thank the Lord every time those funds dropped. So you can just feel that there's something different about Guaranteed Basic Income compared to any other government program you can think of. And that's because any other program you can think of is not designed to meet an individual's specific needs. any other program you can think of, whether it's rental assistance or food vouchers, that is the government saying, here is what you need, now make it work. Whereas guaranteed basic income just molds itself into the individual needs that that specific person has. If they have an emergency, their car breaks down, that can help them. If their kid gets a fever and suddenly has a whole bunch of medical bills, that can help them. And so it is just unrestricted money that says, I trust you to know what you need most, and now go off and live your best life. And so that's what we saw from our program: reduced stress, more financial stability, more feeling of dignity. I think guaranteed basic income is definitely the future.
So we just opened the enrollment, and we're enrolling 15 people a month over the next 10 months. We have 45 participants in our program right now. So if y'all know any Indigenous or Pacific Islander folks who are pregnant right now, send them our way. And so I had the chance to talk to one of our doulas. We primarily provide doula and home visiting and cultural programming for families. We're a direct service community-based org. So I had a chance to talk with one of our doulas who has some of her clients who've gotten into the program to say, like, what are you hearing about this? And one of the things was even like our application, like compared to, we just talked to them for 15 minutes, asked them the basic questions that they need. There's a simple document upload that they can do, take pictures from their phone afterwards, and like, that's it. So most of them were like surprised at how easy it was. They didn't have to do anything afterwards. That once they're in the program, they just let us know if they want a reloadable card or if they set up their bank account for direct deposit, and then that's it. We don't follow up with them. If they start making more money because of the guaranteed income, if it allows them to get a better job, if they don't get kicked out of the program, we don't have the benefits for once you start making too much money, you lose those resources, because part of what we want is for people to be able to support themselves, right? And so there's that level of like trust and not surveilling people and not following them, that even just in the process of receiving these funds, that's been healing. And then also the flexibility of it being unconditional, as the council member was saying. Like one family, they were able to use this guaranteed income for the next 3 years to be able to buy a house. Another family that was gonna like lose their housing because their FMLA hadn't kicked in yet, they were able to like still be paying rent. A family that wasn't able to afford formula and had run out is now still able to feed their baby. And then there's this level too of that trust again. One of the recipients is a teen parent and has been in foster care and just living under the surveillance of her family and of the system for her whole life, to just have this process. It's like, no, we trust you. You got this. You spend the money. Like that level was just so deeply healing for her. And I guess one last piece too is like, it's not just the tangible costs of being able to provide things, but also the healing of the internalized narratives around deservingness and like what is possible, the ability to like radically imagine and dream. Like one family, they're considering taking a vacation and going back to Guam to visit their family. They're like, whoa, we're gonna be one of those vacation families. And our doula was saying too, that like, you know, she's saying, you don't just have to buy groceries with this. Like maybe you want to get yourself a nice diaper bag or like buy your kids some presents. Like just that ability to feel like you can provide and like enjoy life, and the ability to dream about things that weren't possible before, go back to school, do that job training, those sorts of things.
I appreciate the punctuation that you made of unconditional, because I think both in how they're able to spend funds, but also their qualification for the program itself. This is why I guaranteed income over universal basic income, or even sometimes use minimum basic income, is really important, because we're able to actually hit the folks who have the most intersectional needs, and we're actually getting community-based organizations who are of by for, who know exactly who need to be enrolled in those programs, right? And prioritizing them for the administration of the programs. For us and for trans folk, we know, all of the things that are intersecting to cause both violence and health disparities and income disparities in our community. And that is, shelters are not accessible to us at all. And so we can't actually find even emergency shelters, not less just secure housing, because that's not available to us because of our identities, and our employment is not accessible to us because of rampant discrimination. And also housing, just deep housing insecurity. And so what we've seen with our folk is that they have, just with the guaranteed income, a lot of them are actually on gig work or oftentimes sex work. And so this guaranteed income allows them to have a steady set of funds coming in regularly so that they can do their small business and grow their small business and their gig work business itself and have freedom there. And so they've had steady employment actually since they were receiving the $1,000 a month. They have less housing insecurity. They are still seeking other mutual aid. We actually thought that that would go down, but they're still seeking other mutual aid as needed. And they're still having the same kind of levels with incarceration and relationships with policing, which is also interesting that it doesn't fix everything. But none of them have had to go to the shelter. Most of them had. Before receiving guaranteed income, none of them have had to interact with the shelter system or any state housing system. So to an extent, right, the amount of violence that is happening in shelter systems, that is happening in emergency housing against trans people, I mean, there's a direct correlation to this guaranteed income preventing them from violence, right, directly on their bodies. And so it's why I really do emphasize an intersectional approach. I really, an intersectional approach meaning like thinking of who has the most intersectional needs in our community, who of all of those areas that were listed under the Seattle Solidarity priorities, who's actually feeling that the most. And I think that would be Black trans folk, it would be Native Two-Spirit people, and et cetera. So we need to make sure that as we are building out pilot programs, especially with limited resources, we have to think through who's actually going to be benefit the most from these programs.
This is like the fun part of the panel because there's just so many great impacts that just go on and on and on and on. And one that the gig workers and sex workers comment reminded me of too that I really appreciate about guaranteed basic income is that in many pilot programs, it actually for the first time, like finally financially values stay-at-home caretakers. Those that are raising our children, those that are caring for our elderly, they finally are being paid and valued financially for their work. So that's a major win. Like I said, in 2022, we ran our first iteration of our pilot. So at this point, we have quite a bit of impacts, all of which you saw on that list. We had families getting off of anti-anxiety and anti-depression medicine. We saw families being able to clean up their credit and get approved for a home mortgage loan. Some families were able to pay for tutoring for their kid as the transition, as many of us in this room know, the transition from online to in-person to online during COVID was really wonky for a lot of students. Some of our families were able to fly across country to go to funerals or go to a wedding. One of our families was able to kind of take the night off and go to a Mariners game. And some of those things, you know, we have 5 different participants that act as kind of storytellers, if you will. So they have chosen to publicly share their experience. And at one point, one of them asked me, he was like, you know, we use the dollars to go to a Mariners game. Do you not want me to say that in an interview? And I was like, oh, no, by all means, I want you to share that because that speaks to the reality that there is a standard of living that we all are due that goes well beyond basic necessities. And that's why guaranteed income is so phenomenal too, right? Is that it allows you that if one month you need toothbrushes and you need hand soap, go get that. If the next month you're able to take the night off and go roller skating, amazing. If you're able to put it into a savings account, next level, right? And so it is able to work on all of that. And then the other thing that I want to touch on too, that Patanjali and yeah, both of you have spoken about so well too, is that through one of my, again, favorite things about this basic income movement is that not only do we get to test out and see the impacts of cash, which I'm biased, but I think we've proven that cash works. But we also have this opportunity to pilot different ways of administering publicly ran programs and get to play around with the best way to implement and run benefits programs. And so, for example, in Tacoma, we use this model called self-attestation, where we had an income bracket. We found that 40% of the Tacoma community are all kind of within this one income bracket. So we really wanted to focus in on those folks. So we had kind of an income requirement, but that conversation looked similar to what it sounds like Patanjali's program looks like, is that, you know, they came into the office, and I guess I'll give one example. We had this one individual come in and she had this big folder with her, and she described it to me as the documents that she typically needs to prove that she is deserving of support. And I gotta be honest, that broke my heart, that she has to feel that she feels that she has to be able to prove that she's deserving of some sort of support. But within the self-attestation model, I said, I don't need to open any of that. Like, thank you so much, but what income do you typically bring in? She said, you know, X, Y, and Z. I said, thank you so much, and we moved on. And I'll share that we had 110 of those onboarding calls, and probably 95 of them, we both were just sobbing by the end of it. So even before the guaranteed income hit their bank accounts, there were all of these impacts just through compassionate program design, and program design that values each individual and trusts them as they are. So there's just, yeah, myriad impacts that these programs can have. And so far, many of them are very positive.
Thank you. Quick definition check. What is a self-attestation program? Can you say that again and give the definition?
Yeah, thank you. Self-attestation is basically you self-attest to what it is. So where in typical, you know, in many of our benefit structures, if they have an income requirement, you have to prove via income stubs, you have to prove via your bank account, maybe they need to talk to an employer, different things like that. But a self-attested model is that they just speak truth to their reality, and you don't have to prove it, quote unquote, because their word is proof enough.
Thank you. Abigail, did you want to add something?
Oh, I was just saying, when we do like our intakes, I just say like, you're basically just saying, I promise that what I'm saying is true. Yeah.
Spread the word. That's the magic statement. Okay. So now we get to talk about our hopes and dreams for our programs moving forward. This could be like an immediate hope and dream, or something that you see down the road, how this program fits into our larger liberation. No pressure.
I'd like to see guaranteed income for all trans folk in Washington State, period. And I'd like to start in Seattle. And that can be coupled with a myriad number of other programs. I mean, all Black folk in Seattle need it. You know, there's a number of people, but I want to see guaranteed income for all trans folk, especially right now, given this political moment and the attacks that we're under. We need safety, we need security, we need assurances from governments like ours that we will be okay. And so I want to see that. The second thing is the one conversation that happens, you know, before we start the panel, and anytime anyone with guaranteed income is gathered, is the benefits cliff, right? And figuring out, what do we do about people who are all of a sudden are receiving this income, and their SSDI and their SNAP benefits and their, you know, the TANF benefits, et cetera, are at risk. And so we actually need legislation. We need like some secure legislation. I think we could do it in the state of Washington. They did it in Illinois very clearly, that exempts this income, at least from what the state controls, from state benefits. We may not be able to do it for federal benefits, but we absolutely can do it for state benefits. That's an easy win, I believe, if we can get our legislators towards to stop being so scared of the extreme right and just move on it.
Certainly we have so many different policy objectives, right? That benefits cliff, just mitigating that, especially as it relates to guaranteed basic income, but also just generally. I think my hope is that these basic income programs shine a light and a new path forward for the ways that all of our publicly administrated programs operate. As I mentioned at the beginning, we spend quite a bit of time advocating on the national scale for a basic income. We were fortunate enough to get invited into the White House, actually, so things are happening. So that definitely, so, you know, our focus as well are people up and above the federal poverty level. It's very common that only if you're well below the federal poverty level are you even acknowledged by federal assistance programs. That's something that certainly needs to change, because you could be making twice as much as what the federal government would assume is poverty, and still by no wrongdoing of your own, just unable to afford basic necessities. So we certainly have very many policy goals. You know, I have some more kind of like, I have a tender heart, and I have some goals around some of that too, where I really just think that these programs offer a way for each of us to recognize that we really do just have inherent value, and we really do have inherent dignity that is allotted to us just by being here. And to recognize that within ourselves, and to hope that that spreads then to see the value of our neighbors, to see the value of the people all the way across the country, to see the value of our environment, et cetera, really just hoping that this time to breathe, to step out of survival mode, allows for a whole new way of being and walking around our streets.
As I mentioned earlier, I come at this, I agree with everything that's been said. And as I mentioned, I said earlier, I'm sorry, I'm a little flustered, but I come at this from a reproductive justice lens, and I see guaranteed income as a way to support families and like the right to have children, to not have children, and to raise children in safe and healthy environments. And so within that, like policies that I can think about are like 2 years paid paternity leave for every family, like freestanding birth centers, particularly for Indigenous communities where people can practice their traditional birth rights, and including abortion access, right, full spectrum care and end of life care. There's an Indigenous community here that's been trying to find land where they can bury their families in traditional ways, and they haven't been able to do that. And also when we're talking about interrupting, right, over 500 years of colonization and genocide, the results of the impact of doing something like a guaranteed income during pregnancy, right, which is such an incredibly potent time, not only for the parent and caregiver's life, but also that like stage of early childhood development when we know how like intergenerational trauma is passed down for genetics. We know how stress compounds that. We know that like those early years of baby's brain development can set people's behavioral development for life. So the impacts of that can't be measured in a simple like 3-year study, 5-year study when you're talking about interrupting intergenerational trauma. So like when I'm dreaming big, I'm like, what is it gonna look like when those children, those babies that we're funding right now, like what are they gonna be like in college? Will they go to college? What's it gonna be like when they start having babies? You know, and looking at those rates according to like historical loss scales and those sorts of things. And one thing we're also considering, we're really fortunate in that we're privately funded, so we have a lot of freedom and we have total control over our evaluation. So we have hired like a director of data sovereignty, and we're doing everything aligned with decolonizing evaluation principles. And like one thing that I would really, really love to see is this like revitalization of language practices. Like I'd love to see languages that are endangered coming back. I'd love to see traditional dance and regalia being passed down generationally. And like, what does that mean to reclaim identity? What does that look like to maybe even develop scales around maternal child health from an Indigenous perspective? So there's a lot of big dreams, and I'm a little tangential. I see this economic intervention as like as a help. It's a pathway to maternal child health.
Thank you. All right. So before we break into Q&A, this is an opportunity to address the audience and think about how like community support helped make these dreams and programs possible. So how did community members like our audience today help you achieve your program goals?
Certainly different things like joining on in support of the Solidarity Budget Coalition and different things like that. I also would welcome you all. There's a statewide Guaranteed Basic Income Coalition that just does phenomenal work, that is always open to new volunteers and extra support. Chiming in with your electives, all of those typical things are really great. And again, I'm going to take us down a different route as well, is just to name that a lot of this work is likely to be very uncomfortable. There are so many different changes going on that even though it is so positive and there is a lot to come from it, there's just discomfort with change, whether that's within ourselves, within our systems, within our neighbors, and to really talk about this program and to, explore that discomfort, not to shy away from it, and to just get curious about what it means that it's there, what you do with it, and to hold it in compassion and to just try to nurture in this kind of new way of being. And like we all just got to kind of vision of like what would it look like if a guaranteed income when it continued. For you all to also take in that of stride and just like start to vision and start to really walk in pace of what you want the world to look like, and then to start working on that as well. There's a lot more particulars as well, but yeah, that's just some of the kind of internal work that we all need to do in order to usher in this more safer, gentler, compassionate, and giving world.
I would say just continue to, since the summer of 2020, there's been a steep decline in support for Black-led and Native Indigenous-led organizations, particularly Black-led orgs. And we got a lot of energy and a bit of funding, and then we started having a lot of creativity. I would even say the Solidarity Budget Group, right, comes from a lot of Black-led leadership, right, and a lot of ingenuity that came from an idea and a spark of hope that suddenly people are paying less and less attention to. So we were able to use our creativity and our research and our brilliance and our love of people and our care for folks to push for guaranteed income, to come to this solution and to push for the legislation. And the same thing that happened in San Francisco, right, that is actually starting to have positive impact on lives. And that was not because the public said, we need y'all to go out and do that, but the public said, we trust you as Black-led organizations to do the right thing. So keep supporting Black-led orgs, lean in a little bit more. Don't forget about us. Don't forget about the commitment that you made with your whole bodies and your lives, right, in the summer of 2020. That doesn't go away just because time has passed.
I feel that. It felt almost like a rubber band or something, like there was so much progress and then it cut.
Yes.
Yeah, push back. And there's a lot less room to say the things and do the things. I mean, I think we're a community designed program, and so we wouldn't exist without the community support. As I mentioned, we had an elder council that was part of the design process. It's now our cultural advisory council that helps with like major decision making or issues around eligibility. We have a self-attestation process as well. And those pieces will go through our community advisory council as well. And I think our organizational model holds community at the center, and that's very specifically like Native and Pacific Islander families. And we center on that a lot. And that itself even isn't a monolith. And there's so much work that needs to be done, even around like the concept of indigeneity, right? Because there's so much in there, and there's so many indigenous communities that we don't serve that are truly like valuable as well. And like we wish we could serve everyone who deserves the things. And so I think it's hard for me to answer that question of like, how can the larger community get involved that isn't repeating what's already been said? But I think some of that is like doing that internal work. Like when I think about guaranteed income and this idea of abundance, right? Because it's about reclaiming abundance. And even with reproductive justice, where it's like, it's a value add. Like both of these things are like expansive models. And I think for folks who are in relative positions of privilege or power, and they hear about these types of programs or things that are gonna like shake up change or pull away power, it's like a closing off, contraction. But really what we're saying is like, let's include everybody. Like let's have a radical imagination possible enough to know that like there is enough out there to show, right? Like there's enough houses in Seattle to house everybody who exists, but like we're not doing it, right? So we have to just have the radical imagination, like that Ursula K. Le Guin quote from earlier, to like imagine ourselves in a different place and like understand that this is really like about expansive inclusion of more than it is about like taking something away.
Can I want to add super briefly too, as we all embark on this work, like just enjoy the wins as they come. Even, there is no GBI program too small. There is no too small a participant circle or too small a dollar amount or a budget allotment, whatever. Like it is all a win and it is all a bonus for the movement, for the recipient, for us all at the end of the day.
Okay, now we can do more than snap. We can applaud fully the brilliance of this panel. How much time do we have for Q&A? 20 minutes? Okay, great. So we can take a few questions from the audience and I'll help facilitate. I'll repeat back questions so folks online can hear.
Question online. It is, actually there's a couple, but the first question is, where are Seattle council members at in terms of the proposal?
Should I repeat that?
Yeah.
Okay. The question is, where are Seattle City Council members at in terms of the proposal?
I don't know what's a council member.
Yeah, I think that-
Speak to like some things.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, sure.
I'll take it.
Where are city council members? So it's tough this year for a couple of reasons, and I'll just explain briefly what those reasons are. One of the reasons it's tough is because we're trying to switch to a more biennial budget process, which means doing it every 2 years instead of every 1 year. And we're in the middle of that right now. And so what that tends to mean is that council members are less excited about starting brand new programs in the middle, which, means that we can prepare the way now potentially for the future. The other really big issue that we're facing right now is that there's a huge budget deficit that we're projecting for next year, like $250 million. So that's big. And so one of the things the Solidarity Budget is doing this year to try to plan for that is pushing really, really hard for new progressive revenue options to be passed now by the end of the year, so that there's enough time then for that to be designed, implemented, for the money to start being collected, so that we have that money in place for 2025 when that big deficit comes up. Otherwise, besides the guaranteed basic income program, we would just have an austerity budget at that point, right? There would be no additions, there would be a lot of cuts. So we're pushing for that progressive income this year. I really cannot overstate the importance of having that passed this season. And we're hoping that we can kind of lay the groundwork with council members and with the community to get people to understand what guaranteed basic income is, what it can do, why it's such an exciting programmatic idea, so that we can get more community on board to join in helping educate our council members and helping them to see how popular a program it could be and how transformative it could be for the community.
That was great. Any more online questions or questions in the room?
How much of the percentage of the progressive revenue policy that everyone wishes to encourage you want to see exactly going to the GBI?
The question was, how much of the percentage of the progressive revenue do we want to see go towards GBI?
I don't have a percentage for you offhand because I don't know how much progressive revenue we're going to pass. And since I don't know that number, it's hard to say. Obviously, we're going to need to put a lot of that money towards the deficit, right? Solidarity Budget, as an abolitionist organization, would obviously like to see some money taken away from the criminal legal system as well, to use for programs like GBI or other programs that are more beneficial to community and less harmful. But I can't put an exact figure on it. I could tell you more in December, probably.
Thanks, Amy. Oh, there's a question in the back. Yeah.
Hi. So I'm on the board of a housing and human services organization, and they have some money set aside to start a basic income pilot. So my question is, how could you start that? Where's the first place to go? Once you have the money, how would you start implementation of it?
Great question. Okay, so the question from the audience was, how do you set up a program for providing GBI to services to people in the community or clients?
I think some of the things I wish I had, we had thought about before was the benefits cliff, right? And figuring out exactly, I'm not a fan of putting a lot of qualifications on, except by the community organization determining who should qualify for a program. San Francisco had to do, I believe it's $1,200 a month, but they decided to only give it to people who made less than $500, right? Because they were really scared about messing with their Social Security. And so they had to make little tweaks and determinations on that because we don't actually have the protection, the legislation to protect folk in the state. So really thinking through like what that looks like. I think also how are people dealing with their taxes, and do you have a plan to educate them about how they need to be filing their taxes and what they need to be reporting and what the implications of not reporting those things are? So getting your folks ready for that. Also your values, like are you, what if you're not hearing back from people? Are you going to be okay just continue to give them money and trusting them? Or are you going to need a whole bunch of reporting for people who are actually doing the funding? And maybe it's not the best program for you because like the idea is that you set it and forget it, right? You give folks the money, you trust it. And then if you want people to, report back, it's completely optional and voluntary for them to report back. And it's, in my opinion, and it's best manifestation of that type of program. So, and I, as a person who really deeply believes in intersectionality, I would be thinking about intersectional needs, like who is the most impacted of the people that you serve and how do you prioritize and center them? And how does that actually benefit the other people that you serve who may not be getting that money, but what are the benefits of those folk actually receiving the funds through the intersectional approach?
Yeah, that is a great question. I'm also so happy to talk to you after this or meet with you. Like I've definitely coached a few other programs or had these conversations, and it's fun to like ideate about the possibilities. I agree with everything that you said. The Jane Family Institute has a really awesome toolkit for building a guaranteed income program that helps think through those things. If you have the funds to do like a basic community survey, like that could be like a Google, what do you call their surveys? Google form, as simple as that, and like send it out and do like incentives or a couple focus groups with your community to hear like where their priorities are at. I think always talking to the folks about like their needs, thinking through like what's going to be most accessible for how to reach your community. If they're like unhoused, like reloadable debit cards are probably going to be good, but what if they lose it? Like how would you find them to get them a new card, and like thinking about those sorts of things. There's lots of like the realities of the day-to-day logistics of dealing with humans that is really, really helpful to think through. And then thinking through also what kind of like narrative work you're going to want to be doing alongside of it, what kind of stories that you want to come out of that, what are your policy goals surrounding this too, and that can help shape like the form you do it, or if you want to do any type of data collection, and if you do, like, are you going to compensate those folks separately? Definitely like the benefits counseling, if you want to do any like financial literacy work with folks too, although there's a whole thing about that too. Providing folks with like a letter, like we had like a lawyers write up a letter being like, this is gift income, it's not taxable, we promised this, so they can show like their employers or other folks. Right, even though we haven't gotten waivers for WIG, we're working on getting waivers for WIG and SNAP so the income doesn't count against it. We're also working to try to have specific folks within agencies at social services that like we can refer our families directly to help get folks enrolled, or if they lose benefits during the program, like re-enroll them, those sorts of things. So yeah, there's lots of little human components. And also the guaranteed income community of practice is like a large national movement. And if you're not already on their listserv, that's a really great resource to ask any questions, because a lot of folks have thought these things through before, and you don't have to like, there's over 100 pilots right now, so you have the benefit of not having to figure this out on your own.
Happy to move on now. Thank you. Question in the
Yeah, I
back.
was just curious, like, there's a whole, like, everything you were talking about having to think about it. I was just thinking about, like, we don't typically like a bank account set up. you have to go through a process with some people that have that, or can you somehow get people if they need it cash directly, or is it all digital?
That was another great question. The question was, do you need to have a bank account in order to receive funds? Are there other ways to receive funds other than through the banks?
It's a phenomenal question, because really I think the intention should always be to meet participants where they're at and what they need. So, we've taken a couple of different approaches. One is that if they do have a pre-existing bank account and they would like the funds put into there, which is what we heard from a lot of our community groups, is that they wanted the money to be more theirs than on a card or something. So that's one route that we've gone. We also do prepaid debit cards, and we partner with some third-party tech companies actually that are working right now on being able to design systems to put them directly into an individual's PayPal or Zelle or Cash App or something like that. So that's an up-and-coming technology. Some programs do checks, which we've heard is kind of limiting, because again, you're back in the banking system. An intention of some programs too is to promote banking services for folks and to get them into kind of safe housing within a credit union or something like that, if you will. That's what comes to me top of mind. I don't know if any of, cash payments.
That sounds great. Yeah.
Thank you.
Is there a way to ensure that all residents or the discerning program manager that would be in charge of this not only went to all residents of PDAs and affordable housing, but future affordable housing or future PDAs in the process? I.e. social housing with their residents.
Sorry. I'm alive. Okay, the question, is that about outreach and connection and coordination, or?
It is about ensuring that there are funds that are equitably distributed to all of the residents of PDAs, like Gen Pride or African Town or other underserved residents, but also upcoming emergent PDAs like the Cultural Space Agency and the Social Housing Developer, to ensure that these residents can get the GBI.
The question, thank you. Did I break it? Can people hear me? Okay. The question is there a process for setting up programs in current PDAs and also future PDAs that are being set up right now in the community so that those residents can have access to GBI? Everyone's looking at me.
I'm gonna take it. Okay. I think if we were to have a GBI program in Seattle, it would need to be designed from the floor up, and so that would be something that would be part of that design process. And my hope would be that it would be similar to what you did, that it would really be a process that would bring in community, so that we could hear from community what would work best for them as we were designing the program. So none of that has been designed yet, which means that, the possibilities are open right now.
And I guess too, I want to shout out, I can't remember the name of that report, Abigail, like the governor has like a 10-year poverty reduction work plan, and they hired a task force to put together, they researched and put together recommendations for a statewide guaranteed income. And in that they propose a spoken hub model, which would work kind of similarly to what I think you're asking around, working with specific community-based organizations that target vulnerable populations and having them be the ones to distribute the funds. And in that they propose folks in states of transition. So in that it's not just folks experiencing houselessness, but folks at risk of that, folks leaving the carceral system, youth who are exiting out of the child welfare system. Pregnancy was a transitional period. I can't remember all of them, but just thinking about those transitions are a good place to catch folks. And so I think that that's something to consider for if there was to be a citywide one of the housing crisis is very real and very important, needs to be addressed. And there's also all these other deep community needs, or I think folks substance treatment, exiting out of that, right? That catches folks that have these intersections with housing insecurity too. And so is reaching folks directly when they're already in those programs the best, or can we also be working to target people who are at risk of becoming passless too?
To find that study, I would just look up in the search bar Washington State Basic Income Feasibility Study, and it is a like 78-page beautiful document that says that basic income would be good for Washington. So.
I would say one of the issues really quickly with the results of the study, and also I think with the legislation that came up in the state that we struggle with as a Black community, is there was an avoidance of identifying in terms of, they were thinking about a lottery-based system that gave a certain amount of points for a person's economic status. And I think there were certain categories that they felt was legally safe to cover, and race and gender weren't two of those that were on that list. And so I think I would hold a lot of care with the people who produce the study as you read it and as you think about administration, that I know the values of Seattle Solidarity Budget, right? And then we'd be thinking about race and gender as central to the way that we are administering any guaranteed income program.
Is that affirmative action issues?
Yeah, we can't.
So-
Raise our hand.
Sorry, the question was, the follow-up question for me was, it was affirmative action not passing at the state level part of the restriction for not being able to serve race and gender?
That, I mean, that was the excuse, you know, right? And that's the feedback that we kept getting, is that, you know, there's, yes. Yeah.
Okay.
The answer is it's a racist country, so you can't use public funds
Oh,
to
that
give people
thing.
money sideways.
Yes.
But there's proxy measures that you can do to get around it. But yeah, that's a big hindrance for publicly funded programs.
Okay, I'm gonna leave it alone, but what they came back and said to us was, well, it's under 200% poverty level, and we're, you know, there's housing and there's whatever, so most likely that's gonna be Black people. And we were like, no, that's not how that actually works, right? That's not how race works, so, yeah.
Yeah, that's not. Okay, question from online.
The question is, for the panel, what do folks think is the ideal payment amount to be made for GBI?
Okay. So the question from online was, to the panel, to please explain what you all think the ideal financial or monetary amount, payment amount should be for participants.
Yes.
I don't have just one answer because it depends on which population you're working with. You know, we in Tacoma, like I said, found that roughly 40% are within this 100 to 200% of the federal poverty range, which basically we learned from conversations. Folks were saying that like, it's just that last little bit of the month that I'm not able to afford, that I have enough for all of these other things, but I'm just falling short in, you know, and we asked our community, what's that typical dollar amount if you had to put it on there, like what's that major gap? And $500 is really what came back, where I would think, you know, in other programs where you're working with communities that are living on the streets, you know, $500 is going to likely do very little to get them into permanent and sustainable housing. So for some populations, you're going to need to increase the dollar amount. And again, you have to kind of toe that line with tax implications and implications on other benefit programs too. So it's a pretty complex problem or question, but the exciting phase of where we're at right now, I think within the guaranteed income movement, is that that's all what we're working to figure out, is that what populations are best served by basic income, what cadence is, you know, like, is it monthly? Is it every other week? Is it, you know, every 6 months, something like that? So we're working to figure out really like how best does a guaranteed income function? And one of those questions is what dollar amount is most ideal.
Yeah, I agree that it depends. And right, you see benefit from $500, you see benefit from $100 a month. And there's also like the duration. People want a smaller amount of money over a larger amount of time. There's one program that they're giving money, and they gave folks the option of like, do you want to receive this amount of money over 12 months, or do you want to receive one lump sum in the beginning? That's like half of the money, and then smaller payments for the rest of the time. Because a lot of folks who are swimming in debt, they're like, it will take me 6 months just to get out of debt. So like, let's give folks a bunch at the beginning to front load that, you know, like, so it really depends on people's circumstances. One thing we were coming up against was like, I think the poverty limit in Seattle is like $1,500 a month. So we were like, what if, when we were dreaming in the beginning, we're like, what if we just double that? What if we double the poverty rate and give people $1,500 a month? But legally, Washington State, there are no taxes, income taxes. So it wasn't relevant here, but in other states it would be. We just have the federal limit, which is $16,000 a year is the maximum that you can give to people and still have it not be taxable. It's like a gift income. So that's something to consider too, of like, do you want to like make your participants deal with taxes and having that? So we settled on $1,250 a month, which would be giving people $15,000 a year. And then we set aside about $1,000 per participant for like a hold harmless fund, which is one solution to a benefits claim for any benefits lost. And something I've also heard is like giving them enough money that like if someone loses their benefits, like it's negligible compared to what they're receiving. So there's lots of factors to consider when thinking about that. And we were like, do we give more people less money? But we really wanted to be like, well, what does that look like to raise the amount of money and like see what happens when you actually give generously. Yeah.
Two quick things is one with the tax implications, which this is super in the weed. Not only would the recipient pay taxes, but so would the paying organization on a high gift amount. The second thing is that I just want to plug the statewide bill that was written last year for Washington State, and actually a national basic income pilot proposal that's trying to slowly make its way through Congress. They both attach the dollar amount to the fair market rent price for a 2-bedroom rental in your area. So that's something where it kind of like meets the needs of your geographic location and attaches it to likely your most expensive cost, which is housing.
I'll just add that on the slide that I was showing the cost comparisons with various carceral costs, the figure I was using to make those calculations was $1,500 a month. There might be tax implications with that number. So I'm not saying that that's the final number that I would want to see in Seattle. It's very complicated too, because from what I understand, it depends if it's privately funded or publicly funded. Since this would be a publicly funded program, trying to figure out exactly what the tax implications for that would be has been a little bit complicated. So we decided to stick with 1,500 for those projections, but actually those are very conservative, right? Like most of the GBI programs that I have read about have been $500 a month or $1,000 a month. So, but because we have such a high cost of living in Seattle, we were thinking it might be better to raise that a bit.
So tax experts, if you're in the audience, we have a volunteer gig for you with Solidarity Budget. All right, it is 8 p.m. and so I want to honor our closing time tonight and just invite you all to give another round of applause for Amy and Patanjali and Jaelynn and Abigail. And all of the Solidarity Budget members. Okay, I have 2 seconds of stuff I'm going to read to you. I'm sorry, but it's really important because it's all call to action. So if you would like to support Solidarity Budget's demand for publicly funded GBI here in Seattle, you can give public comment on Wednesday, October 18th. Mark your calendars. It's starting at 5 p.m. either in person or at City Hall. Either at person at City Hall or remotely. If you'd like to support around giving public comment, you can attend our upcoming virtual public comment workshop on the evening of Monday, October 16th. And we're always looking for more volunteers, so you can sign up to volunteer at the volunteer table right now as you exit in the back. And make sure to take food home with you because we have extra. Or you can find more information about all of these opportunities to get involved by visiting Solidarity's Budget's website at solidaritybudget.com. SeattleSolidarityBudget.com. Also, shout out to us getting that URL. SeattleSolidarityBudget.com. Okay, everyone, thank you so much for coming. We really appreciate you. Can't wait to see you in our organizing. Have a great night. Take care.
Right. Thank you.
There are always,
Thank you.
it's just like